in terms of the latest developments. Now, if it wasn't for Kiri Allen, I think this would be the top political story of the week. But with David Parker stepping down as a revenue minister and essentially what appears to be a vote of no confidence in not just the Prime Minister but the current administration, just weeks out from an election, this is certainly a terrible look for the current government. Joining us on the programme, political commentator, director of the Democracy Project based at the Victoria University in Wellington, Dr. Bryce Edwards. Bryce, kia ora, what a week it's been.
Morena, yes, it has. I think one of the most difficult weeks for any Prime Minister for a long time. And we're all just seeing, bits and pieces floating around that make it feel like it's the end of an era, really.
With David Parker's resignation, I mean, he picked a week for it, really, although this has obviously been bubbling under for some time. Wasn't happy with Chris Hipkins' captain's call on scrapping capital gains tax or wealth tax. That was his baby that he'd taken to cabinet. It seems a bit petulant. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I have quite a strong regard for David Parker. I think he's one of the most impressive of the government ministers, and he's a serious policy wonk and a brain, and he's quite grounded. He doesn't really tend to create stories about himself. About he doesn't he's not the sort of minister that throws tantrums or throws his toys out of the cot, and so I take it quite seriously when he basically resigns from being the minister in charge of tax. And yes, he's done it, like you say, in the midst of things that have obscured this from being the big story that it is. But it's a major story, and it's one that is very policy orientated, and it's a policy that's always important. I just don't think we discuss tax and debate tax enough in this country, but at the moment it really is an almighty topic that I think we will be seeing some differences between Labour and National and all the other parties in the coming election, and people focusing on, I will vote for this party or another because of their tax policy. And here we have David Parker, the spokesperson until now on tax, throwing it all in and saying it's untenable for me to continue. I mean, this is quite amazing stuff, and it's a real blow, I think, to Labour's chances of being able to use tax as their way of getting themselves out of the current hole they're in.
Ideologically, of course, he's not alone in this regard. Certainly amongst the coalition partners, a strong push for a tax of this type. And, Finance Minister Grant Robertson, he said he wasn't devastated with the change. Obviously, David Parker was. I mean,
so we're talking about the Prime Minister's captain's call a week or so ago, when he said, not only did we rule out a wealth tax for the recent budget, but I'm ruling one out for as long as I'm in charge. And so I think this was quite a big call, yes, that a lot of people on the party, in the party rank and file, in the caucus, in the cabinet, would have disagreed with. Maybe even a majority, I don't know. And tax is increasingly seen as connected with inequality, connected with the ability of the state to properly run health and education and all those other parts of the welfare state that we benefit from. And so this was seen as almost a bit of a betrayal by the Prime Minister, especially for those on the left of the party, those more progressive politicians like David Parker. And I think Grant Robertson has tried to signal that he's part of that disappointed group. And even at the time, I was quite stunned to see that both Parker and Grant Robertson went on the public record to say they were disappointed with the Prime Minister's decision. Highly unusual. Normally we have a situation where if the Prime Minister says this is how it is, the cabinet has to agree. We have this cabinet responsibility, collective responsibility rules, that when something is decided in cabinet, you're not allowed to disagree with it publicly. You're not even allowed to give a sign that you might disagree. They were quite open in their disagreement with it. They may have been able to escape punishment or even being fired by the fact that maybe this hadn't been discussed in cabinet and that Chris Hipkins had made a captain's call, so they were kind of able to
whilst overseas.
It was very unusual.
Yeah.
So I suspect that there is some sympathy for David Parker's view.
Now, with this resignation, though, this is essentially a vote of no confidence. If it wasn't for the fact that the Prime Minister was running out of competent ministers, this would be the end for David Parker. He's keeping some of his portfolios. There's even some confusion as to whether or not he'll keep some revenue responsibility. Surely that's naive at best.
Well, yes, he holds on to a few portfolios. The biggest one he has at the moment is transport,
Yep.
and he was given that when Michael Wood was sacked. And, we're hearing from the government that Parker wants to focus on transport. And I think that's all good, but also not really believable that that's what this has been about. But he also has other portfolios, such as associate finance, which in the past has given him some responsibilities in terms of tax.
Yep.
But when you resign from being the Minister of Revenue, really, you can't expect to now be the spokesperson on tax or commenting on that.
In any other scenario, do you think he would have been sacked for his, lack of support for the Prime Minister?
It's really hard to know what's gone on behind the scenes, but yeah, I tend to think so, that he would have been managed out, sacked, or something. I mean, there's even some suggestion now that he could be a future leader of the Labour Party. Okay. He's run for the position before, so he is a rival to Chris Hipkins, and of course we had other rivals lining up at the start of the year, such as Kerry Allen, Michael Wood, and they were seen as people that could take over in the next term. But now David Parker could be the last one standing. So I think for the good of the party, it was probably wise that he hasn't been pushed out, because they might well need someone to take over after October 14.
Now, there's been some interesting comparisons made between this current scenario and the Longy government, where, again, there was a bust-up between a Prime Minister and a Finance Minister over ideological finance policy reasons. In that scenario, though, it was the Prime Minister that left, not the Finance Minister. It was also a two-term Labour government. Is it the writing on the wall on this one? Are we heading the same direction, perhaps?
Look, back in 1988 and then 89, when David Longy resigned, I think there was proper warfare, internal warfare going on in that cabinet. That was just extraordinary stuff. So I don't think we're at the same level. I do think we're seeing it shifting towards that, absolutely. And we're seeing the same sort of chaos, but not the same enmity. But I think the parallels there are quite right to draw, because back then, of course, David Longy was also making captain's calls. And yes, I think it was, various ministers were dismissed because they broke with cabinet responsibility and disagreed with the Prime Minister. So unity is one of the big issues that voters actually seem to care about quite strongly. They sometimes won't be bothered with some of the ins and outs of personalities and details about policy, but when they see a party is infighting, not really having it together, they lose faith in the competency of the politicians to actually be able to run the country. So that could be another sort of outcome of Parker doing what he did this week. Yeah,
well, we've only got a few weeks to wait now until we see the outcome. The election looming, of course, and this all happening, within the... certainly the electoral campaign is underway, and this is this sort of side issue is the last thing that the government needs. Appreciate your comments as always, Bryce. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Andrew.